Rie, thanks for tuning me again.
Yeah, lovely to be here. Thanks for having me back.
What's happening with your newsletter? What's this? What's all the fuss about? What's the latest twist?
Oh gosh, I have to warn everybody that I'm running totally illegal operations out of my home office here in Norway. So people better watch out.
You should be arrested.
Yeah, Sergio, it's been a year long story, like several years. And I've had a newsletter since 2017 or something. In fact, I've had several. And of course, being in the field that we are, after all, taking care of people's privacy and protecting their personal data, I've been very conscious about how to do this in a compliant as possible way. And I'm intentionally not saying 100% compliant because that doesn't exist,
Yes.
right?
Yes, that we know.
So over the years, I've used different vendors, and then of course my newsletter suffered death by Schrems 2 in July 2020
Yeah.
because I was using a US-based vendor. So I went back and forth with several of my subscribers because I wrote to my subscribers about what's happened and how I was going to deal with it or wanted to deal with it. And I had this really open and transparent dialogue with everybody because I wanted to get their feedback on how do you feel about this? How do you feel about me transferring your personal data to the US when it's strictly illegal?
Yeah.
And I got some really interesting perspectives on that. And most people, I'm not sure I can even remember one single person said that they would unsubscribe. But ultimately, I actually decided to just terminate both of my newsletters because of this. You know, a few years pass, we get the DPF in place again. But in the meantime, I had found another newsletter provider in storing all of the data in Europe. And I have also outlined this journey and all of the headaches that I've gone through to try to manage this as a business owner as well. And ultimately, that sad story ended with me leaving that provider because it took so long and so much frustration to even write and send those newsletters.
Yes.
So I went back to the US-based one that I'm already using for other purposes. So it's already paid for and all that good stuff. Then come October this year, and a few things happen, not only in October, but during the fall. First, we have the KNLTB Court of Justice ruling from the Netherlands on what's a legitimate interest.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then we have the guidelines for legitimate interest from the EDPB. That's on public consultation for another few days.
Yep.
Then we have the updated e-privacy guidelines from the EDPB. And I'm lost here, Sergio. Like, what are we? How are we going to deal with this?
Yeah. So what I was thinking about, so I heard your podcast episode on that, on your journey and how you landed on the European supplier and all the issues that we all have when we try to use. There's plenty of good European suppliers, but that's a very good business problem. So it's a really good example. They have no scale. So when looking at your newsletter dilemma, I also think of the other side. So who is the subscriber? And you've got a tool that is going to be adding trackers, and I understand that's the concern for a lot of people. So the read receipts and the pixels embedded so that we know who's been opening an email when you are, running the mailing list. And that only happens because the reader, the subscriber, is not careful enough, I'll say, to understand what kind of email client they're using. So if you are, I remember about 5 years ago, I switched from Spike, which is a great email client, really good, it's got lots of things, to Spark, which is another one that is very good that I'm still using. And the only reason why I did it is because Spike would not let me disable the read receipts on my end,
Yeah.
And I remember, we used to have these pre-built sort of read receipts in the Microsoft world, in the Outlook world.
Oh, they're still there. The EDPB uses them.
Yeah. But I guess they're less hidden now. And then you've got the Gmail, the web-based environment where you can disable it. You've got options to disable images, and with images, all of the pixels and embedded calls, third-party calls are disabled. So if you are a subscriber to a DPO newsletter and you are using a system that you cannot control, I don't think you can expect a lot from the provider. You are owed some diligence to yourself as well. Why would I complain if I'm a subscriber to to such a service? Because you are serving, because your system is using red receipts. If that is the problem, is that the primary problem?
Yeah, so the reason I went back to this provider was because I'm already using them. I'm highly familiar with the system. I can write and send newsletter in a Wi-Fi. It is so incredibly easy. And being a company of one, as I like to call it, I'm a one-woman show here, and I run several websites. I run a portal. I build everything myself. I do everything myself in the business except for the accounting. I publish stuff on LinkedIn all of the time. I speak, teach, consult. I do all of these things. And I need effective and efficient operations. That's why I went back to them. And where the problem initially were the transfers to the US, that's no longer a problem. The issue now is the analytics. And believe me, I would have disabled them if I could. And I have been in dialogue with this particular vendor for years. It's US-based. Unfortunately, most people, they want the analytics. So it's been a really tough battle with them, trying to get them to disable it. And they haven't ruled it out. They've been open along the way. But months turn into years and nothing has happened so far, unfortunately. But I'm not giving up. And the challenge with my newsletter now is that when I switched, I decided okay, I'm going to rely on consent for the sign up. So when people enter their name and their email address, that's based on your consent. But for the newsletter analytics, I would need a separate legal basis because it's a separate processing activity with a different purpose. So I had to choose between consent or legitimate interest. And to me, consent, it doesn't feel right in this scenario because you can't not consent. You can't consent to signing up to the newsletter and then not consent to analytics. They're bundled together technically. So I went with legitimate interest because that's what feels fair. And I have taken so much care to be really explicit and open and transparent about it. It's there on the actual sign-up form, and you have to actually check a box to say that you've read my privacy notice, where I've really explained this in detail, how it works. So I was accused this morning of not being transparent, not informing people about the analytics, and I can't understand how can I make this clearer than it's right there on the form. You actually can't, sign up unless you've read that.
So you apply the GDPR purely, and that's very good, separate purpose. I would have done exactly the same because I do not believe in fake consent. So if you're going to bundle it, how is that free? So I really think it's a sort of ancillary use of the data, different purpose, aggregate data to see, how many of these are being open. You're not gonna be profiling people on the basis of, which ones they opened. So I agree. I guess the problem that you stumbled upon then is the e-privacy directive in its new interpretation.
Yes. Oh my gosh. So they finalized these, and I've heard your episodes with Peter on this that I recommend everybody to tune into, because it feels impossible now to be compliant in any way, shape or form. I used to say there's no such thing as 100% compliance. Now it feels like the regulators are telling us there's such a thing as 150% compliance. Because it's beyond, any reason with these new. And to be fair to the EDPB, I don't think necessarily that this is their fault because they are only interpreting the law. I think as per the law, or the directive, it's probably correct. So the problem is in the directive. We need e-privacy directive to go away and be replaced with something else.
In the meantime, as we said also in that interview, with analytics, they understand that it's not so risky. So they're applying this, this idea of intrusiveness, as we used to have back in the early days of the Privacy Directive, the ICO, applying levels of intrusiveness that sort of dissipated, it went away. But if you're doing analytics in aggregate, and it's a sui generis, it's a specific use case that is not contemplated in website analytics because it's email analytics. So, yeah, we have a dilemma. Now, we thought we were really well protected and that everything was very clear, and now we cannot do business. That's the reality. You cannot do anything. There's always going to be someone that is hypersensitive. We've created a sort of fanatism, I have to say.
Yeah.
There's a religion. There's a new religion built around the GDPR.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny you mentioned, because when I had a presentation at Nordic Privacy Arena, and one of my slides is exactly from that, a bunch of people with their hands high shouting like, hallelujah, we are GDPR compliant. And it's not, we're never going to get there. It doesn't work in reality. And this is such a huge problem with the GDPR now, that it's like the law of everything. It's above everything else. GDPR, strictly speaking, is nothing else than accounting, tax rules, all of that. It's part of business operations for a business, mind you. And what made me really fall in love with GDPR wasn't the legal text, it was the bigger vision and the ambition behind. And I don't think that the ambition was to kill off business.
Yeah, I mean, Treaty of Rome, this was about the free flow of data from day one. It was really about supporting that and making sure that if it was free flow, then it wasn't going to be, losing protection out of the EEA and so on. So yeah, totally, it has to support the business. So what do we do now?
It's even mentioned in Recital 4, the freedom to conduct a business, that it has to be balanced. And are we really balanced with all of these new rulings and guidelines and opinions?
Yes. So now everything is personal data, right? Everything is personal data. Now it's so hard to get data to be anonymized. Then everything is processing, accessing, or storing in the device, because of course the Privacy Directive is alive. And then nothing passes the test of legitimate interest. Everything requires consent, not just because of e-privacy, but also because of how consent is being, again, sort of, it's contaminating everything, if you ask me. So what do you do now? I mean, back to sort of wrap it with your newsletter, I don't think there's a way out. I think people who become such fundamentalists are either trying to sell something or very, very often not being used to building anything. So the entire proposition is criticizing, is simply suing people or raising your hand. But if you build something, no matter how small, you already understand the need for things to work. So with the newsletter, I think if providers come with basic analytics bundled, it depends on your audience. And in your case, I think you're lucky because you're not deceiving anybody. You've got nerds and fundamentalists.
Yeah, it's funny because you mentioned my audience. Like the people I write super geeky things about privacy and data protection. Everybody who subscribes are my peers, my colleagues.
Yeah.
So if I was violating fundamental rights, I don't think I would have had so many subscribers that I have. And I rarely have unsubscribes. And even the whole journey with switching from the European-based provider to the US-based during the summer this year, I lost 5 subscribers.
Yep.
5 unsubscribed because of that switch. The rest were completely happy with, their email address and name being transferred to the US. And everybody's happy with analytics because I was crystal clear on that point.
Yeah. Look, I would even drop the little checkbox. It's to me, it's confusing. It feels like I'm being dragged into something else. Like I've got enough. I'm gonna read it.
Yeah.
I'm gonna read the notice, and I'm going to trust that balancing test. So I think you're okay. I'm only sorry that it's so disappointing because we need to be dragged into these debates when we should be looking at things that are not transparent, looking at the
Yeah.
abuse of consent, trying to get rid of the annoyance, if you ask for my mission, of the cookie
Mm.
banners, But so let's go back to legitimate interest then, if you're okay with that, and the recent news, and especially that one, the Lawn Tennis Association, and what's with the Dutch TPA, going straight to the meat of it.
Yeah.
They're on a mission. They've become quite activist,
Yes.
and were they always like this? I cannot remember older cases in the Netherlands, but I can see the recent cases and
Mm.
how they reacted. They sort of rebel in their official communications, in their public statements against the CGA EU's judgment.
No, it's shocking, I have to say, because we saw a few years back in the football TV case where the company actually ended up going bankrupt because the Dutch DPA dragged them through the court system. And even though that was overturned, they still continued now with this tennis association. And this is a case that started back in 2018. And it included the personal data of about 350,000 members.
Yeah.
And the problem here, there's a real problem here because the tennis association shared all of that personal data with third parties, so-called sponsors, and they used that for marketing purposes again on their side, including gambling companies. And
Yeah.
I'd say that, that is really bad. Like if you think my newsletter analytics is bad, look at this case. And the Court of Justice, so they just ruled what we all knew from before, except the Dutch DPA, that a legitimate interest, it doesn't have to be found in a concrete law. So it means that even purely commercial interests
Yeah.
can be legitimate. And this was the crux of the matter, that the Dutch DPA said that no, purely commercial interest is illegal. And what's so shocking here is what Paul Breitbart said on their Serious Privacy podcast as well, that the Dutch DPA should have found that this particular interest was illegitimate because of the impact and the scale of the processing in this context. They shouldn't have found that any commercial interest is unlawful. And I'm surprised that this had to go to the Court of Justice, because in Meta versus Bundeskartellamt from last year, they already found that direct marketing could be a commercial interest, just not in the context of personal advertising for Meta, in the context and impact that they did. So I'm just shocked at the level of so many aspects of this case. So a lot of people were happy to see the ruling, but then I took a closer look at some of the paragraphs, and we see that consent nudging sneaking in there as well, which is so unfortunate, I think. And also, it kind of gives me the feeling that none of the judges have any real business experience, because they are so quick to say that it's equally efficient if there's an equally efficient option, and then they have some meanings and opinions around that. But what are those based on? Have you actually looked at how the processing activities are set up in an actual company, in actual operations? I doubt it.
Yes, that is the problem. And that's what I see in every single debate we have about everything from e-privacy to any of the fines. That is a good point. So to tackle that and sort of break it down, we've got the Dutch DPA on the one hand, and they need to probably get close. It's funny, yeah, it's surprising. I mean, in the Netherlands, which is like the number one place for business,
Yeah.
Yes, and then you've
And they
got
posted on LinkedIn the same day or day after the ruling, and they used language such as they put the citizens first, like as if the Court of Justice don't. And as far as we are concerned, that is still how it should be. And this is a machine translation, but it's shocking to have a public authority go out on a social platform with this kind of message. So I really think that somebody should reevaluate who's sitting in those roles there.
So maybe we've gone too far with all the literature, all the surveillance capitalism. I always thought that, and at least we're going to get some more philosophical, but I really thought that first, personal data shouldn't be commoditized. And I still believe that.
Yeah,
I think we may have taken that too far when talking about surveillance capitalism and sort of denigrating every single business out there. Because now, if we oversimplify things and we start looking at this as instead of a fundamental right, fundamentalism, or basic, again, like a religion, then we just cut through everything. Nothing can survive if you take that to the extreme, because it feels like we're destroying everybody's future with every single pixel. And I think we need to make a distinction. What is the real risk? I wanted to ask you. I can see there is a risk in how you expose data in the advertising marketplace or in a newsletter being opened. But you need to ponder that risk. What do you think of that? How far do we take this?
That is a really good question, because I think it always comes down to the context. You have to look at your personal data, your situation, your processing activity. And an example I always give in GDPR trainings is that it's a street address, personal data. And most will say no, or maybe, well, it can be, because I found one street in the US where it only lives one person. So to kind of, prove my point.
Yeah.
But and then my next question is, but is it special category personal data? No, obviously it's not. Well, is it sensitive? No, most people don't think that. But what if you have children living on a secret address, hiding from domestic abuse? All of a sudden, then the street address becomes sensitive. Is my newsletter, is that any, special category or sensitive? Not at all in my context. But what if you subscribe to anything related to a particular sexual orientation, and you're a married person with a different sexual orientation, and that gets leaked? So it's all about the context. And this is what people tend to miss, and the regulators and authorities tend to miss, that rather than putting, I'm so conflicted on Article 9, whether or not we should even designate any special category, because as I said, a street address could be so sensitive. It could mean the difference between life and death.
Such a good point.
So I think everybody needs to just look at the context of the processing defines the sensitivity.
You're right. The GDPR is going to start crumbling in our hands. One block at a time.
I feel I'm getting grumpier by the opinion. And it's such a shame, because I'm so highly motivated and I'm really, really passionate about what resonates the most for me in the GDPR is the fairness principle, by far. That's what really, really inspires me about the GDPR. But the way we are now pushing towards the fundamentalism, as you say, the consequences are really, really bad. For example, you would have people that are trying to do the right thing. They have invested tons of time and effort and money into this to be as compliant as possible. Whereas a lot of other controllers and processors, they don't care. They never cared, and they get away with it because it's complete bingo whether or not you're selected for an audit or not. And it affects the people who are trying to do the right thing. And also the regulators, the way that they are trying to take down the real evildoers of the world, the ones that are really exploiting our personal data by creating guidelines and opinions that, they say, no, it's not targeted at any particular company, but we all know it is. And it affects everybody across the board, tiny, small, medium to the biggest ones. And the biggest ones, guess what? They have huge budgets for this. TikTok, Meta, everybody, they have it in their balance already. So this is why it's so frustrating, and why I think it's such a dangerous path we are now moving on with the recent guidance and rulings.
Exactly. That I've been saying for a long time. We're using data protection as a means of public policy to sort of further some sort of agenda which is protectionist and a short-sighted. You said it. We think we're gonna add some barriers to Meta and TikTok and Google and so on. All we're doing is simply making them stronger because they get a bigger moat because they have the resources, not just regulatory or compliance or lawyers and that kind of muscle, but also the technical muscle to even, we see it these days with privacy enhancing technologies, the things that I see people at Meta doing to be able to do more with less data. Smaller companies or publishers have no way to get their hands on these themes. So they're going to be better at surviving these hurdles. And now the GDPR, it is that. If it's becoming, a vehicle to, again, to boost some sort of protectionist agenda, then it's not working. Not even for that. It's not working.
Yeah.
It's just bearing smaller companies and all of the players in the EU that need to use a newsletter supplier. Because in the end, we need a supplier. Look, I'm looking at all of these MarTech suppliers. That's what I do all the time, looking at marketing technology suppliers. And I see European companies, again, in Southern Europe, in the Nordics, everywhere. And I can see that invariably, I keep seeing companies that are widely tested in the US, again, because it's a very large market. So if you've got such a vast market, things are tested with volume. You need volume. So a Spain-based provider of a CRM is not as well tested as a company in the US. And also it's got so many barriers because they need to comply with everything. So first you are making the suppliers slower. They're going to take forever. Everything requires a DPIA. Everything requires, if you go by the book and by all of the guidelines, and if you are letting yourself be affected by, everyone criticizing what you do, then they'll be very slow. So they're less agile for starters. And then you get to their customer, so us or any potential customer or an enterprise that wants to find one of these tools, for example, for A/B testing or analytics or any of these things. And now you're looking at these tools that had to go through all of these holes, through all of these, struggles, and compare that with a supplier from the US or Canada, or a tool that had the freedom to explore and that has no boundaries. And then you keep saying that sometimes the best way to run your business in a cheaper way, in a more efficient way, is to use those tools, which is very sad for the local industry, but also you need to survive as a small business. It's very annoying.
Yeah, but that's such a great point that the US ones, they have already this huge market to do their testing without the strictest privacy and data protection laws. Well, they're getting theirs as well. But I think it's such a valid point. And we can't forget that the GDPR is just one of the laws that we as business owners must adhere to.
Yeah. But I don't want to be pessimistic. I want to end in a happy note. I think we've got amazing, creative people in Europe, these amazing businesses. But for many of these things, you need scale, and we're not going to get scale. And we cannot fool ourselves as well. We've got 1 million languages. Already in Spain, we've got so many languages we can't even talk to each other. So it's impossible across Europe, Yeah. Okay. So any other thoughts? Anything that you saw that is interesting these days besides, again, the Dutch CPA, legitimate interest, and your newsletter?
Gosh, I am such a geek, and I absolutely love diving really deep into these guidelines and rulings and everything. And I got hung up on the concept of strictly necessary, because in the GDPR in Article 6, it only says necessary. It doesn't say strictly necessary. So I got so tripped up by that. And I went back to Meta Bundeskartellamt, and that's where it was really highlighted in the context of contract and the legitimate interest. So I've gone through so many rulings to see where did that actually originate from. And to me, and it's a bit early to say, but I actually think that maybe the Court of Justice took it too far here, that they've gone back to rulings where they've added strictly in a different context. And if you look at Article 6 and the way that the Court of Justice has interpreted it in the last few rulings, that's another example for me that they are taking it too far. Why should it be necessary to be strictly necessary for a legitimate interest? And some have said that they don't think that adding the word strictly really means so much. But I don't agree. And I think also the new guidelines, somebody said that there's not much new in the new guidelines from the EDPB. I disagree there as well, because if you look at the wording and how they actually present it, they are actually raising the threshold pretty significantly. And it's becoming more and more difficult to actually rely on any legal basis for whatever processing activity. And all we're left with is consent. It's like it doesn't work in the real world, and it's such a huge concern of mine. And I really think that it was a mistake by the Commission to say that, we're not going to revamp the GDPR now. I think they will look at it again in 2028. So we're going to live with this nightmare until then. And then who knows? Are they going to do anything? But sorry, no, I went back to the negative thing. Should we try to end it on like some concrete practical tips for people?
Yeah, well, look, to end on a positive note, again, because consent is sort of taking over, the positive thing that I see is that since we're not going to do anything in terms of guidelines or compliance or anything coming from the European Commission or reviewing the e-privacy directive or coming up with anything that replaces that, at least the browsers and technology is advancing fast. And I do see that. So in the US, you've got the global privacy control making inroads across all browsers. Google is going to replace this idea of the privacy sandbox or the imposed privacy sandbox with a forced question. So once consent is real, because people have to make the effort to go and opt in, at the browser level, and they cannot just discard it for every single website that comes in the future, then numbers are going to be so low and so pathetic, nobody will be able to do anything. And then once the business is totally destroyed, because we rely on consent and consent just doesn't work, right? You cannot annoy people with the banner. Then we're going to have to rethink and to come back in the arms of our beloved legitimate interest.
Yeah.
To finish on a happier note.
Let's hope for that.
Yeah, let's hope for that. Let's put our hopes in technology for us to get rid of this abuse. That's my wishful thinking.
Yeah, and I fully support that. And I think because I'm getting a lot of messages from really desperate and frustrated DPOs saying that they already struggled to be taken seriously and to get, anchor their messages internally. And now with the sub-processor opinion as well from the EDPB, life is definitely not easier. So I think from a practical perspective, my recommendation to everybody is to revisit your compliance work, as we all need to do anyway, and take a risk-based approach and make sure that you at least review stuff, go through your legitimate interest assessments, add a date to everything so that you can show it to the DPA if they can come knocking on your door. And not necessarily fully update all of your legitimate interest assessments. But the fact is that if you have made really well thought through, solid arguments, the logic will be much harder for them to challenge in a possible audit. So, and final thing, everybody should practice a DPA audit once a year. That is so much fun. You pretend that the DPA comes knocking, and then see, what's going to happen and how are we fit to respond. So make it fun. It is possible, I promise.
Good, I like that. Well, thanks, Rie. Thanks again. Thank you.
Thank you, Sergio.
Okay, that's all for today. Our repeat guest today was Rie Aleksandra Walle. She brings over 17 years of professional experience across both the private and public sectors, having worked at Christiania University College, Ernst & Young, Nordic Innovation, and the Norwegian Agency for Public Management and E-Government. Rie is behind the DPO Hub, to which I'm subscribed, which helps busy DPOs by offering concise summaries and practical takeaways from key CJEU rulings, EDPB documents, and DPA decisions, as well as by putting together a community around it. She is also the host of the Grumpy GDPR podcast. Follow us on Blue Sky, and in the Masters of Privacy Altogether profile, you will find the starter pack, which includes the feeds of all of our past guests. There is also a Masters of Privacy LinkedIn channel, which I invite you to follow, where you will find links to our transcripts, cheat sheets, and other surprises every now and then. Our main website is mastersofprivacy.com. Thank you for listening.